Today, I have some books for you that I was looking for years. And it's not necessarily that these books are hard to find, it's that these books have the lessons in them that I was looking for that I wasn't able to find. And really what I mean by this is that we all kind of know there's certain kind of information out there that is really striking to us, and we all kind of are on the precipice of finding it, but the more we search, the more it feels like we're missing out. And then every once in a while you'll read a book and it really puts things in perspective, and it really gives you that taste of that thing that you were looking for. So with that said, we'll get into these books. The first thing is Florence Scovel Shinn, I think is how you say it, The Collected Works. And she is a New Thought author. If you don't know New Thought, just think of How to Win Friends and Influence People, Neville Goddard, Wallace D. Waddles, I think it is. Somewhat Emerson. Emerson's kind of the first inklings of these ideas in America. But this is kind of a thing that's like kind of laughed off as like bunk, or like it's not effective, or it's just hearsay and all these things. But like there simply is something in believing that you can do something, and there simply is something in taking the mindset of what if I could do this thing, and always taking the positive side of things, that is just so fantastic in terms of the results in your life. And myself right now, I'm trying to express myself creatively. I'm trying to write something. I'm trying to do various projects. I'm trying to do certain things. And over the past few weeks, I've been finding myself defeating myself instantly. I make this cope. I make this cope. Well, I don't have this, so I'm not good enough. Or I don't have this. I don't have this. I don't have this. And like, even before I begin, I'm telling myself I can't do something. And that's really one of the worst things you can ever do, because you don't even put your foot in the door. You don't even raise your hand and try to answer. You don't even try. So you could never even know. You know what I mean? It's like we're all capable of so much more than we could ever possibly imagine, but we never accomplish those things because we're not able to believe. We're not able to think best case scenario, and we're not able to put that best case scenario in our head and operate off that idea. Imagine how effective you could be if you were inspired by the fact that this is possible, and that this is coming to me, and that I can do this. And that's really what I think is so magic about the New Thought sort of way of thinking of things. And Florence Scovel Shinn in particular, there's just something about the way she's speaking. It's so matter of fact. It's so just in your face. It's so there, and there's such a faith and a hope and a spirit behind it that it's just, I don't know, reading the first 20, 30 pages of this, I really feel like I found something that is going to be the starting of something very, very powerful inside of me, and something very fervent and strong and faithful inside of me, and very able to tackle the naysaying inside my own head, and very able to tackle the circumstances of my life that aren't going my way, and rise up in spite of that and become something more. So with that said, we'll get into the next thing. This is In Search of the Miraculous by Peter Uspensky. This is perhaps the most well-known book about Gurdjieff and Gurdjieff systems. If you don't know Gurdjieff, he is a mystic. I don't really know the best way to describe him. Esoteric thinker, somewhat similar to Steiner or other figures like that. Blavatsky kind of started their own thing. His system's most commonly known as the Fourth Way. I'm sure there's other terms for it. I'm sure there's other distinctions. I don't really care about terms or distinctions. I think it kind of takes away from the true essence of things. But In Search of the Miraculous is essentially P. Uspensky trying to explain Gurdjieff's systems. And, the original title was Fragments from an Unknown Teaching. It's something along the lines of that. I probably butchered it myself. But basically, he's kind of showing you that there's something really profound here. And Gurdjieff somewhat stumbled upon some ancient wisdom and was able to come to some sort of understanding, was able to come to some sort of enlightenment for himself. And really it's a study of the tactics and the ways that Gurdjieff approached these systems and these problems that is so unlike anything else. And the reason why I'm saying that this book took me years to find, and that it really set things straight, is because there's so many different metaphysical concepts I've read about. I've read so many different texts that cover the same topics, but none have quite put them so simple, and none have just quite penetrated instantly into that intuition of that this is the truth. that there's something here, that there's something underlying to what he's saying that is so profound and so important. And it really ties together a lot of dots that I've just kind of had out there, that I've kind of, oh, I knew this from here, I knew this from here, but for whatever reason, it tied them together and it connected them, and it made things make sense, and it really made a lot of my study and my search just come into the bigger picture and finally kind of come together. But the few things that I really took away from this book is the idea of man is a machine, and this is really what Gurdjieff's most well known for, is that most of our actions, most of what we do on a daily basis is so mechanical that we can't really be classified as human beings. We're more a machine. We're closer to automatons. And basically, I want you to think of your day and think of how many things that you consciously do. You know, you wake up in the morning and you go on your phone and it's 20 minutes later, and then, ooh, where did the time go? Ooh, what was I doing? Am I even awake, or am I still asleep? And that's really the whole point of Gurdjieff. And I think Gurdjieff's probably more important now than ever, because most of his main messaging is that you have to gain a mastery of your attention. You have to gain a mastery of your awareness and be able to understand yourself so that you can understand the world as a whole. Because, you know, it's really difficult to love someone else if you can't love yourself. And it's the same thing with the world. It's the same thing. It's you know, how could you ever understand other things if you can't understand yourself? How could you ever control other things if you can't control yourself? And everything really starts with the self. Everything really starts with your own faculties and your own capability. There's a really good example of this sort of idea and how important attention is in Aldous Huxley's novel, The Island. I think it's either Island or The Island, but essentially Huxley is writing a story in a juxtaposition to Brave New World, where society is kind of a utopia, and you know, most of the utopia is combining the marvels of technology with the heights of spiritual capacity in man. And regardless of what you think about the book, there's this really one important aspect of it where these birds are flying around and they're yelling attention, 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 to make sure that you are aware that your attention is the most powerful thing you have. And you know, I want you to understand it today. Like, when you go on social media, you're making someone money. Right now, you're making me money. It's not a lot, I promise you. I wish it was a lot, but like, right now, you're generating dollars for somebody. You're generating advertising for somebody. And you know, if you start thinking of your attention and your time as money, I think you're going to take it a lot more serious. But this really gets us into the actually important ideas from Gurdjieff, because it's not enough to know that you're a machine. How do we stop yourself from being a machine? How do we stop yourself from being so mechanical? And it all starts with self-observation. Where are your thoughts going? And I don't want you to judge yourself. I don't want you to say, oh, I just wasted an hour or two on TikTok. I want you to see, like, oh, I just did this. I was just mindless for this amount of time, and it was because of this. It was because of this. I was worried about this. I was worried about this. See where your thoughts go. Start to observe yourself. Start to observe, you know, how able you are to deal with boredom, and how able you are to deal with different scenarios. And when you're stressed out, what do you do? When you're tired, what do you do? Start to see these things and start to see where your mind goes, and start to see your habits. Because once you start to see the machine, then you could start to break the habits of the machine. But a machine doesn't know itself. A machine doesn't understand itself. So once you understand the machine, you can break the cycle of being a machine. And this leads us into the second aspect, which is, how do we then expand upon this? How do we again, you know, command our attention and be so focused and so intentional with our thoughts and our actions? And it is just, I'm making a video and I know I'm making a video. I'm looking into the camera and I know I'm looking into the camera. You know, I am Bino and I'm looking into the camera. Like being aware of yourself while you're doing things. Being focused on the exact moment and having that attention in that exact moment. I'm reading a book and I know I'm reading a book. That sort of idea of things. And it's something that it might not make sense at first, but the more you do it, the more it's going to make sense, because I want you to think, how much of your day are you consciously doing things versus how much of your day are you allowing to slip through your hands? Because if we were intentional about everything we did, then we would be living the lives of our dreams. But because we're not, we are wasting our lives away. There's an idea that if you're not controlling your mind, somebody else is. And it doesn't even have to be insidious. It could be the news. It could be TV. It could be advertising. It could be your friends. It could be just people around you in general. Like, your mind is going to drift. Let it be conscious instead of unconscious. Control yourself instead of being at the whims of the world. This leads us into the next thing, which is Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. And this is a book that I tried to read a while ago, and I just couldn't get into it. And I knew I was going to like it. I really did. But I just didn't have the patience or the attention at the time to put myself into this book and really enjoy this book and really love this book. And this is something that will grow with you. This is a book that I plan on rereading at least 10 times throughout my life, because it's that interesting. And essentially what it is it's a play on the idea of leaves of grass. So what are leaves of grass, and what makes up grass? And it's sort of that idea that we're each our individual leaf of grass that's flowing in the wind, that's combining to create one grand field, one grand meadow, and that we're part of a cycle, we're part of something more, and we are all in some way part of some divine inklings, part of some divine path. And there's a whole lot of ideas in here that are just so fascinating, and perhaps the most famous is on the back. Do I contradict myself? Very well then. I contradict myself. I'm large. I contain multitudes. And this is an idea that I wish more people could embrace, because we live in this day and age where you have to be right about everything. We live in this day and age where you're not allowed to change your opinion. So you're going to fight until the bitter end to prove your point of view correct, instead of just admitting, you know what, maybe I was an idiot in the past. Maybe I was wrong in the past. Maybe I grew. Maybe I learned. Maybe I became better. Maybe my perspective shifted and my perspective changed. And there's so much to life about change. There's so much to life about flux. And I think Walt Whitman hits this perfectly. There's just a way that Walt Whitman speaks about the struggles of everyday people, and how he says it's just as noble as the struggles of who we consider great in society. And there's not really differentiation in people, just a seriousness we take to their tasks. And there's something beautiful and so profound. And I wish I could write this way, but I find myself way too cynical, and I find myself way too not aspirational and inspirational. And it's really something I'm trying to fix in myself, and it's really something that I noticed through reading Walt Whitman. And there's a reason that Walt Whitman is known today. There's a reason that his words resonate today, and there's something so beautiful in these words, and there's something so just deep in these words. But the one thing I will say about this book is that it drags on. So you're either going to love it or you're going to hate it. There's sections of it where you're like, okay, I get it. And then there's sections of this like where you're like, this is some of the finest writing I've ever read, and each and every single line is just a quote that I can go on for days and days and days just thinking about. And I mean, it's like any poetry. It's like there's better parts and there's worse parts. You know, Shakespeare has some really, really good plays, and then he has plays that just aren't as good. And that's just the nature of writing. That's just the nature of things, is that you're never going to be able to put your best foot forward. And especially when you just put something of pure mastery on the page, there's always going to be a juxtaposition. There's always going to be a comparison innately in our head. So yes, very good book, and we will get into the next thing, because I'm 15 minutes in and I've just been all over the place today. All right, the next thing we have is William Blake, and in particular, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, because I love William Blake, and the more I read of Blake, the more I find myself in his writing, and that might not be a good thing, because Blake probably was crazy. Like, there's something so interesting in the madness of genius, and that there's a level of consciousness, there's a level of awareness that makes you seem crazy to the outside observer. And I think Blake perfectly embodied that. Blake is somebody who admitted to seeing angels in the trees, and I think he might have been locked up and institutionalized if he was alive today. But Blake was writing prophetic sort of poems and trying to liberate the entire spirit of humanity through the idea of imagination. And anybody that embraces those sets of ideas, I am fully on board with, because I truly think the heights of humanity are locked away inside the imagination. And when we bind ourselves by the constrictions of society, when we bind ourselves by the constrictions of social order and groups, and really limit the individual, then we limit the entire race of humanity. And for this reason, I really just, the moment I picked up Blake, I was instantly starstruck. I was instantly inspired. And, you know, if you read a lot of my writings, you will see the influence of William Blake in it. I'm not saying you should read it. I think you should read William Blake instead of me. But if you read all William Blake and you want something more, go ahead, pick up my writings. But Blake has such a way of saying things. And the book I want to talk about in particular is The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. And it's very intentionally blasphemous. It's very intentionally saying something contradictory to what you would expect somebody talking about God to say. But the marriage of heaven and hell is essentially saying that to have heaven, you need hell. To have hell, you need heaven. And it's the juxtaposition of life that gives any meaning. And what this means is that without light, there's no dark. How can we describe one without the other? And that Blake doesn't really see a difference, and all human experience is somewhere in between these two forces. And you know, there's a section called the Proverbs of Hell, and this is intentionally kind of contradictory to what you would hear somebody traditionally talk about in terms of wisdom, what you would traditionally talk about in terms of a proverb. But there's a section that I think defines this so perfectly, and it's the road of excess is paved, or the road of asceticism is paved through excess. I butchered it, but it's something along the lines of that. And really what Blake is saying is that you don't know what is enough, or you don't know how to go off the bare minimum if you don't know what's enough. Because it's only somebody that's experienced too much that will just know it. There's no end in that will know that there's no sort of end in material pursuits and all sorts of those things, and that it's only through this experience that somebody might be able to move forward and live a righteous life. But because we're shunned from seeing these things, because we're shunned from that way of thinking, because we are told that we are irredeemable if we make wrong things done, and we make mistakes, that we can't move forward and be better. And that I think Blake is really trying to destroy these ideas. And there's a really famous quote in this book, and it was really the inspiration for Aldous Huxley, one of his most famous books, which is The Doors of Perception. Very interesting book of its own right, but I'll read the quote and I'll show you just how influential Blake is. Where is it? If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. And essentially what that is saying is that we view things in one perspective. We like to associate our identity on things, and if we could truly observe things as they were, then we could see that there's so much more than the eyes can see. But because we can't, because we're bounded by our organs of perception, because of our limitations as human beings, and because we listen to these limitations, we are limited beings instead of creatures of God, creations of God, and made in His image. And with that said, we'll move into the next thing, because I think this is a perfect segue into the Space Trilogy, because there are a lot of the same themes in this book. I didn't know what to think picking up the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis. You know, if you've read the Chronicles of Narnia, it's very overtly Christian allegory and very just not kind of trying to hide the themes, which, you know, you may like or you may not like, but to me, I always find the allegory interesting. I always find the parables interesting. I always find these deeper messages interesting. So depending on how well it's done, I might like it, I might not like it. But to what I knew about C.S. Lewis and what I knew about his fiction is that it's not really that difficult. It's not really that complex. But boy, was I surprised, and boy, was I pleasantly surprised with the first two books of the Space Trilogy. That's all I've read so far. I'm so excited to read the third one, because the third one is often seen as the best, and from what I know about it, I'm going to very much love it, because it's all about secret societies and stuff like that. And if you couldn't tell, it's really my obsession. That's really the thing I find most fascinating in this entire world. And even to a fault, even you try to talk to normal people about this stuff, and you're like, what is wrong with you? And they're like, you know, some people like trains, I like secret societies. It is what it is. It is what it is. But The space trilogy is just such a pleasant surprise because when you hear space, when you hear sci-fi, you think certain themes. You think I'm going to face nature. I'm going to go out into space. I'm going to fight aliens. I'm going to fire a cannon that shoots lasers and all sorts of stuff like that. And there's very few books that like kind of break from these sort of tropes and are still considered sci-fi, and this is one of them. The first book is essentially, C.S. Lewis's character, Dr. Ransom, going into a unknown world and discovering it. It's quite unlike his world, and that there's these aliens, and they're advanced, but not advanced in terms of technology, but they're advanced in terms of their civilization and their collaborative efforts with the other species that cohabitate and coexist on the world, and how things don't exactly have to be the way they are here. And then you have the second book, which is purely a Paradise Lost allegory, purely a Genesis allegory, and it's just, there's such rich philosophy in here, there's such rich symbolism in here, and it's really fun to see somebody with the intelligence of C.S. Lewis, with the caliber of writing as C.S. Lewis, do something like this, because like even when you read some of these like philosophical works, like I love The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, but there's absolutely no plot in it. And not to say that I want there to be plot in it. I don't. I want it to be a philosophical kind of free verse sort of poem about the essence of life. But it's really interesting when you can have that sort of philosophical weight to it, as long as a really good story, and you don't know what you like more, the philosophy or the story, and it's really masterfully done, and it's one of the reasons why I keep trying to find more fiction, because when I first started reading again, I didn't really think fiction had much to offer. I really didn't think it was going to be that interesting. Like, there's so many interesting stories out in the world that it's like it's kind of hard to beat those weird stories that Gurdjieff tells about meeting H.P. Blavatsky and her falling in love with him. Like, is that true? Is that not true? All the speculation of Gurdjieff meeting, Crowley or Steiner. Like there's all these legends that they're so interesting. They're so fascinating, and it's like, can you ever even create a story that's as compelling as real life in some ways? And for a long time, I didn't think you could, but after reading things like this, I am pleasantly surprised, and I was wrong. I'm glad I'm proven wrong. I always love being proven wrong, because it expands your perspective. It expands who you are. It allows you to see your shortcomings, and it makes you, be more introspective. And the more introspective you are, the more you are able to understand yourself and the world as a whole. I feel like I said that earlier, but yeah, hopefully you pick up some of these books. I found a whole lot of things in them. Wow, it's only 5 books, and I've been talking for 23 minutes. It's a new record, guys. I feel like you guys like these longer videos, though. They seem to do better, and I have more fun doing it, because it's one thing to like do like a list of like 10, 15 books, or like talk about one singular book for a set amount of time. But I like talking about different topics, and I like trying to tie them together, and I like kind of bringing together different themes and different things that I learned from books, because that's how I learn. I learn from seeing the same repeating pattern in things. I learn from seeing details that carry over into different categories and different subjects, and different writers being inspired by different ideas, and how they all kind of come back to singular thoughts and things like that. And that's really how I'm able to remember things. That's really how I'm able to tie together things, and that's really what forms a lot of my perspective. So yeah, that's a little insight into me at the very end. But yeah, I love you guys so much. Thank you guys so much. If you want more from me, become a channel member. We do a weekly live stream where I talk about a book that I assign to you guys. If you want to read my writing, check out my Substack or buy my books. They're both good options. I put little things on my Substack probably every day or every other day. I try to write as much as I can. I haven't been good about it recently, but yeah, I'm in the process of working on something bigger. I'm formulating sort of the finer points, and I'm gonna start really delving into those things and really spending a lot of time into those things. So stay tuned for what I'm working on. Stay tuned on the channel, and yeah, have a good rest of your day, guys. Love you so much. Thank you so much. Peace out. I'll catch you next one.